歡迎各位出席2015
So I would like to welcome you all to the meeting of the Bills Committee on Promotion of Recycling and Proper Disposal of Electrical Equipment and Electronic Equipment Amendment Bill 2015. This is the third meeting of the Bills Committee. Agenda item number 1, confirmation of minutes. Can members please confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of May, and it's paper CB1 878-14-15. The Secretariat hasn't received any proposals for amendments, so can we confirm the minutes, please? Item 2 on the agenda, meeting with the administration. We have from the EPD Deputy Director, Mr. Howard Chan. Then Mr. Samson La, Assistant Director, EPD, Mr. Lawrence Cheung, Senior Environmental Protection Officer, EPD, Mr. Gilbert Mo, Deputy Law Draftsman, Department of Justice, and Ms. Cindy Cher, Government Counsel, Department of Justice. I think we need to look at the issues raised at the meeting on the 9th of April, and we've got paper 788. Can the administration please take us through that paper? Yes, thank you, Chairman. Paper 788, Chairman. In fact, we are responding to 5 questions raised by members. Firstly, the levying or the charging of the recycling fees, and whether recycling fees have to be payable in certain situations. So here we are explaining the mechanism for charging recycling fees again to members. So for manufacturers and importers, when they use or distribute regulated electrical equipment in Hong Kong, they need to pay the recycling fees. And we've analyzed the various scenarios put forward by members. And I think members may have confused the consumers with the suppliers. Under the bill, the suppliers have to pay the recycling fees. So perhaps we can look at each and every scenario one by one, and then I'll see if members have got questions. Scenario A. If an individual purchases a piece of REE in Hong Kong but uses or distributes the item outside Hong Kong, and the item is discarded in or outside Hong Kong, as I've said, the supplier has to pay the recycling fee. And so if someone purchases a piece of REE, then the supplier of the REE will have to pay or will have paid the recycling fee. So in other words, the supplier has to pay the fee. Then scenario 2, an individual purchases a piece of REE from overseas but uses or distributes the item in Hong Kong, and the item is discarded in or outside Hong Kong. So it's like buying parallel imports, and the recycling fee is payable if the individual is a supplier. And then scenario 3, an individual purchases a piece of REE from overseas through online shopping and uses or distributes the item in Hong Kong, and the item is discarded in or outside Hong Kong. And this scenario involves the use or distribution of an item of REE in Hong Kong, and so recycling fee is payable. And then scenario 4, an individual purchases a piece of REE which is a parallel import from a local seller, and the individual uses or distributes the item in Hong Kong. And again, the recycling fee is payable. And this is a situation similar to that under scenario 1. Scenario 5, an individual purchases certain electronic components to assemble a piece of REE for his or own use in Hong Kong. Now, this involves the manufacturing of REE. If the individual manufactures the item of REE in Hong Kong and does so in the course of his business, he will be a supplier within the meaning as defined under the proposed section. And so recycling fee is payable by him if he distributes the item of REE or uses the item of REE for the first time. The second question relates to the setting of the recycling fees and the fee adjustment mechanism. In fact, we are now carrying out internal assessments, and we haven't come up with a table of recycling fees for different REE. But then we need to take into account the full cost of the producer responsibility scheme and other factors. So the fee levels will be submitted to LegCo for approval in the form of subsidiary legislation, which requires positive vetting. Next, how the e-waste can be collected, and also the financial arrangements with regard to the PRS. So members can refer to Annex A for the collection of e-waste. Now the seller can arrange removal service, of course. And then we have been setting up community green stations in the different districts. So e-waste can be brought to community green stations. And of course, there may be other collectors. Private operators or charitable organizations may run certain projects, and so members of the public can bring the items to these organizations. So there will be channels available for e-waste to be collected and recycled. In February this year, we got funding approval from Finance Committee for the design and build and operate contract. So we'll look at the actual workload, for example, how many tons of electrical equipment has been collected, and then payment will be made accordingly. To recover the full cost of the PRS, the government will collect a recycling fee. But then this is separate from the waste, electrical and electronic equipment treatment and recycling facility. The suppliers have to pay the recycling fees. And suppliers can recover the cost fully or wholly or partially along the supply chain and ultimately from consumers. We hope that the seller who distributes REE can provide information to the consumers on the receipt, a paragraph with standard wording to be prescribed by regulation. And then concerning the storage and recovery, recycling of e-waste, we are proposing that there can be certain exemptions so that small-scale operations will not have to be licensed. Some are worried that this may create a loophole. But then I want to say that in fact, there are small-scale recyclers operating within the system, and say they may dismantle the electrical equipment to facilitate transportation, and these are small operators, and we do not want to affect their operation too much. And that's why we are proposing certain exemptions, and that and so some private recyclers can be exempted. And then finally, we've provided members of figures concerning fire outbreaks in recycling plants in Hong Kong in the past few years. Thank you. Mr. Lai, you explained to us the various scenarios. But what if one purchases a piece of REE overseas or through online shopping, but then this purchaser is not a supplier or a manufacturer? So he purchases the item for his own use, and he doesn't pay the recycling fee. So what's going to happen under that scenario? Is such a scenario, or does such a scenario come under the bill? Chairman, as members may recall, during the consultation exercise in 2010, we sought public views as to whether the recycling fee should be charged at the import stage or the retail stage. But then if the fee is charged at the import stage, and it would be like a tariff. So in other words, people who bring REE from overseas will have to make a customs declaration, and then there are bonded warehouses involved, and it's very expensive. And then we do bear in mind that many of our businessmen are in fact small and medium-sized enterprises. So if these items have come into Hong Kong and it is ascertained that they are distributed or used in Hong Kong, then there can be a declaration system to facilitate the charging of the recycling fee. And that's different from the scenario where we are charging something like a tariff. And if one brings an item into Hong Kong or buys an item from overseas through online shopping, that will not come under the ambit of the bill. But then when these items become e-waste, then we want these people to bring the e-waste back into our recycling system.
So we'll limit our time to 7 minutes. Mr. Fong Gong, I have a simple question. The designated recycling firm, we have a lot of small operators. They collect electrical appliances, let's say a refrigerator. They will dismantle the useful parts, and the toxic hazardous parts, they are unable to deal with it. So can they submit it to the government designated recycler? Do they have to recycle these items? chairman, the government operator, they have a responsibility to recycle these items. Some recyclers, they would retain the valuable parts and would dispose of the other parts, and we will recycle it. It will also depend on the product. After the part has been dismantled, as the legislator mentioned, do we have to handle hazardous toxic material? So after dismantling, we don't encourage dismantling. We will look at the actual conditions. In our discussions with the recycling operators, they have to have a wide network, and they would need to liaise with these recycling companies and second-hand goods companies. There might not be an incentive for these recyclers to dismantle the item, because dismantling of these would raise some concerns in the community. In the future licensing regime, all electrical waste operators will have to receive a license. It's not just limited to the government operator. Other eligible persons can apply for a license. So when we have toxic hazardous material, there is a choice. Whoever has a license can handle these materials. So put simply, it would not be just handed to the government operator. So whoever has a license can recycle these materials. So they've retrieved the product. The government's consideration is that we'll have a central recycling firm. They will collect all the material, and the government will handle the toxic hazardous material. They have to hand it to the government recycling unit for detoxification. So this central government collector, he's just another collector. Well, the recycling part does not need, the collecting part does not need a license, but it's only for handling the material that you need a license. So any storage or handling business people, they need to get a license from the EPD, and they can conduct operations. So you can hand it to the central government electrical appliance recycler. You could also hand it to other licensed recyclers or operators. I'm not asking about the handling. So even if you have a central government collector, let's say if with a TV, we have some mercury in the TV. Who will handle the mercury? So the government is spending hundreds of millions to build a factory. So even with a collector, they still have to retain the parts containing mercury for the central government to handle. So let's say I'm a collector, I collect a TV, so I will dismantle parts that are of value to me, but the part that contains mercury, can that be handed over to the government facility for handling of toxic and hazardous material? Yes. That is, small collectors, let's say they get a computer, they have dismantled the valuable parts, and they have the printed circuit board and other parts, and they hand it to the central government. The central government will then process it. They have to collect the material. Next. No questions? Then we'll move into clause-by-clause scrutiny. So The next part, on the 4th of May, we heard from deputations. So the government also has a response. It's document 919. In meeting with the deputations, we had heard on the product responsibility system, the government recycling fee, and the government taking the initiative. And so the different deputations, we could summarize their views, and we'll go through them one by one. The first part is about amendment to the Product Eco-Responsibility Ordinance. So some deputations had views on regulated electrical equipment, and they wanted us to define the equipment. So we do have a clear definition. Some views were also expressed about whether the scope could be widened. So we have also looked at other jurisdictions that have a product responsibility scheme, and we can cover some 85% of 70,000 tons of waste material. So we will work with the industry, and we'll have regular reviews and move along with the times. Another area of concern was recycling fee, the levels of the fee. So I had already dealt with that in my previous response. So let me add that some deputations also asked questions about second-hand goods, and we won't levy the recycling fee on second-hand goods. We'll only target new goods. And in paragraphs 3, 4, and 5, that was already covered in the first document. The third part is about recycling label. We have explained that the purpose is to differentiate products, so the consumers and the public can understand that when we levy the recycling fee, when they purchase a regulated electrical equipment, they are covered by our scheme, and the suppliers will have to pay the recycling fee. So in meeting with the deputations, we were aware that some suppliers were concerned about the requirements of the recycling label scheme. So in preparing for the bill, we had looked at the business impact assessment. So refrigerators or computers, they have different delivery arrangements. So we will not require the recycling label to be stuck on the product like the energy label. We'll have some flexibility. So the arrangements will be explained in detail in the regulations. In the principal legislation, we require that they comply, they provide this recycling label as required in the regulations. And we will continue to discuss with the industry. So when we move into the scrutiny of the bill, we can follow up this issue. Regarding the removal service, a lot of deputations support this arrangement. They feel that they can provide a service to the public. And as we mentioned in the first document, aside from the removal service, there are different avenues for recycling. We have a pilot scheme in the 18 districts. We have the We Go Green scheme. NGOs also collect new products. We also have some recyclers that are licensed, and these are avenues for collecting this material. So the removal service is covered in paragraphs 8, 9, and 10. Then lastly, in paragraph 11, it has been mentioned that the removal service has to be notified in writing by the supplier, and it has to be made known before the transaction. I'm aware that the delegations were concerned that would that affect telephone orders, and we explained that it would not, because we do not require that transactions be conducted face to face. A lot of times we can see commercials made through the internet or SMS. So as long as there is a trail that we can explain to the consumer, then consumers can be made aware of the removal service. So I think the flexibility can handle different modes of sales, such as telephone sales. So these were the views of the delegations regarding amendments to the Waste Disposal Ordinance. We're also concerned about small firms, the licensing exemption. So we had dealt with that in the first document. The deputations were also concerned about how the disposal ban would be implemented. So would the whole workflow be affected? Well, our explanation is that in reality, when you find it's very the odds of finding these material in refuse collection sites are very minimal. So we require these facilities to not accept these products. So in our overall operations, we would not have a criminal liability levied against the operators. So this is the content of paragraph 14, 15. Paragraph 16 and 17 deal with the treatment and recycling facility, the central facility, especially how we can coordinate efforts with the recyclers in the market. In Hong Kong, we have the 4 electrical appliances and computers that add up to some 50,000 tons. So our capacity, our recycling facility has a capacity of about 30,000 tons. So we believe that with cooperation with other recyclers, the pie can be enlarged. So the central recycling facility will collect the material, and will also have other operators conducting this business. And they are doing some off-spec products. They collect industrial material. So their market is different from our target market of the residential sector. So our recycling facility will not drive these operators out of business. In fact, will create a better business environment. And that would conclude my response. Okay, we now open it up for questions. Let me ask one question first then. In the delegation, I also heard some views that the government is willing to set aside some resources to establish a central recycling facility. That is the WeTrif. So we'll call it the central facility. So this operator will be decided by tender.
佢同一般
But in future, central operator will enjoy a competitive edge over other private recyclers. According to Mr. Lai, about 70,000 tons of e-waste are generated in Hong Kong annually, and the central facility will deal with about 30,000 tons per annum. So in other words, the remaining 40,000 tons per annum will be dealt with by other recyclers. But then how can you respond to the accusation of unfair competition? Can I invite Mr. Chen or Mr. Lai to address this concern? Yes, Chairman. I want to say a few words and then Mr. Lai can supplement. In fact, during the public consultation exercise, we did consult the public and the industry on the issue. The public felt that there should be a government-funded facility to deal with e-waste. Now, unlike private recyclers, this central operator has to do loss-incurring business as well, so to speak. For private recyclers, they can choose to recover and recycle only waste, valuable waste. But then for this central facility, it has no choice. It has the responsibility to recycle waste that is worthless, that is not wanted by private recyclers. So this facility cannot choose only profit-making business. On the contrary, private recyclers have the choice. They can choose only to do profitable business. So there will not be vicious competition between the central operator and other private operators. Most of the private recyclers have existing business arrangements with the business sector, and for the future facility, it will mainly deal with electrical products from individuals. Yes, Mr. Lai. Chairman, in fact, in the public consultation exercise in 2010, there was in-depth discussion on the idea of such a central facility. In fact, when we decided that we would have to legislate for recycling, we thought that perhaps the private recyclers would invest more to expand their business so that the government would not have to step in. But then we had a very big question mark as to whether this would happen, because a lot would depend on the response from the market. And then we carried out a survey among recyclers, both local and overseas, and the outcome showed that the private recyclers would not be willing to invest so much money in such a facility, because such a facility would be expensive. And so it was the hope of many that the government would fund the facility, the central facility, so as to recycle e-waste effectively. Mr. Vincent Fan asked whether the central facility will have to accept all e-waste. The answer is yes. But then for private recyclers, they can make commercial or business decisions. They can decide which e-waste they want. For example, recyclers more interested in air conditioners than in other types of e-waste. So private recyclers have the choice to decide what e-waste they want and when they recycle the waste. But then for the facility, for the central facility, according to our contract, it has to accept all e-waste. So we should not say that there is unfair competition. Both I and Mr. Vincent Fang asked this question. If a recycler gets a product, dismantles it, and gets the valuable parts, and then gives the worthless parts to the central facility. The central facility will have to still accept those worthless parts. And so, in future, maybe recyclers may dismantle the equipment, choose certain valuable components, and give the remaining parts to the central facility. So do you expect this to happen in the future? Mr. Lai? We don't think this is too likely to happen. In fact, the operator of the central facility will prefer to form an alliance with other private recyclers. In fact, we do not encourage private recyclers to dismantle the equipment. In fact, it would be good if the equipment can be handled by the central facility. Ms. Sit Ho, 7 minutes. Chairman, but I think this is going to happen. Now we have community green stations, and then we have other private recyclers, and of course there is this facility, this central facility. It's likely that private recyclers will take out the valuable parts, and then for the worthless parts, private recyclers will send them to the central facility, or dispose or dump them illegally, or even such parts, worthless parts, will be sent to landfills. Because some private recyclers may wish to find ways to maximize their profits. And then concerning the disposal ban, you think that there will be more e-waste channeled into the collection network for processing. For example, the humidifiers and so on and so forth. Now, because without the labels, no fees are charged when they are sold. But then, what if people want to submit them for recycling? Is it that people will have to negotiate their price with the recyclers? Because you're saying here that you envisage that increasingly more e-waste can be channeled into the collection network for processing by the central facility or other competent recyclers. But I want to know what your thinking is at the moment. Yes, I'll answer the first one, and then Mr. Lai the second one. So we do expect that some recyclers may give the worthless parts of the equipment to the facility. Now we know that there are certain parts of the equipment which are not wanted by the market. And that's why we need this central facility. The central facility will be charging the government on a tonnage basis, and so this facility will take in both valuable as well as worthless e-waste, and there is an economic incentive for the facility to take in the worthless waste. So you can say that in fact this facility serves as a safety net, providing an underwriting function. And then Mr. Lai can address the second point. But Chairman, I wish to follow up on the point raised by Mr. Chen first. Now, of course, we have no objection to the central facility doing the underwriting work. But then for private recyclers, the small recyclers, they will not apply the toxification technology to the e-waste. They dismantle the equipment, and they take out the useful and valuable parts, and then they give the rest to the central facility. And these recyclers do not have the detoxification technology, and that's my worry. In fact, I have no objection to the private recyclers submitting the e-waste to the central facility in return for a fee. Now, in fact, for toxic e-waste, only licensed operators and recyclers can dismantle the equipment. And for the small operators and recyclers, they have to submit the equipment to licensed operators for dismantling. But how members of the public may not know that these recyclers cannot handle toxic e-waste. In fact, for the collection of e-waste, we don't have a licensing system. But then concerning storage and dismantling of the equipment, then this operation has to be licensed. In fact, we also provide a removal service, and so members of the public can use the service. But then for small recyclers, if they want to dismantle the equipment, they have to get the help of licensed operators. Mr. Lai. In fact, recyclers may not dismantle the equipment themselves. They just buy the old equipment and then sell it and then make a profit. So I think in the market, there are ways to discourage these private recyclers from dismantling the equipment, for example, through providing them with a commission. For toxic e-waste, it can only be dealt with by licensed operators and recyclers. Of course, we'll also step up public education. I think we have to instill confidence in the public, that certain recycling channels are reliable, and members of the public will, as a result, use these channels. And we have community green stations, and I think these are channels which will get the trust of the public.
This involves the future large facility, and the delegations had raised a concern that there would be a large facility in this recycling business. They were concerned that their business environment would be oppressed, and they were worried that they would not be competitive against this large facility because they would have government support and government policy support. So their market share, the government facility market share would expand. So this is one of the concerns I grasped. Now, hearing the government's response, there were two messages that I heard. On one hand, it's been the long-standing policy that we have SMEs, they would collect the material, that would continue in the future. And then the low-value items will be handed over to the government facility. So it sounds like there is some mutual respect. They will each go their own ways. And then you said that the large government facility is thinking of how to expand and liaise with SMEs. So that would be a different story. So will their leading position in the industry lead to a new business environment? They would the SMEs might have to cooperate with them, or in fact the government facility might even acquire them. So you cannot prevent negotiations in the private sector. We cannot also rule out that this large government facility will move towards this monopoly or state, and they would squeeze out these SMEs that handle recycling. They might be driven out of the market. Is there such a possibility? Chairman, to answer this question, we need to look at statistics. Assuming the pie is a certain size, then the central facility, they will have to compete with other SME recyclers, but that's not the fact. Every year there are some 70,000 tons of e-waste. The majority of it is exported. In the future, when the bill is endorsed, the majority of the material cannot be exported. So the electronic waste that has to be handled in Hong Kong will be much more. But our facility can only handle 30,000 tons. So they cannot handle all the e-waste. And e-waste staying in Hong Kong, there is already a division of labor, as Mr. Lai said. The majority of private operators, the large facilities are not dealing with the consumer market. They are dealing with large industrial e-waste, and they are focused on more valuable parts. So this facility, when the market has expanded, there is a lot of business space, and of course ultimately how will the market develop, that would depend on the private enterprises, and also it would depend on the facility. But I conjecture the market the pie is sufficiently large, it can accommodate the facility and private recyclers. Chairman, I need to emphasize that aside from enlarging the pie, you have to bear in mind that the whole chain, from the recycler to the facility, we have two types of recyclers. The small operators who collect the electrical appliances from the consumers, they usually export that. In the future they cannot export it, so they have to find local channels. They either cooperate with our facility, but they could also choose to cooperate with the private recyclers. So if the pie is larger and they need to do more business, they need to invest. Because in our preliminary study, these were small-scale operators, and they just targeted large industrial customers. So if they want to increase market share, they need to invest. So our facility, how it affects recyclers, you have to bear in mind the current situation. Well, the government official says that you have to look at the numbers, and the pie will be larger, and each can find their own business space. But I'm talking about profit. If a certain workflow or a certain product has a high return, and you're saying SMEs, you're saying if they want to engage in the business, they have to invest. But now with the WE facility, they are the market leader. They will capture the most lucrative part, the most profitable part. And the remaining part, the less profitable part, will that affect the SME's business environment? Will that occur? Well, as I answered Ms. Sidho, the WE facility, they have a recycling tonnage quota. They have to charge according to this quota. So whether they make money or not, they have an incentive to collect this material. They have to collect a certain tonnage before they can receive money from the government. So we feel that the operation goals are slightly different. They do not necessarily target high-value products. If the tonnage is more important to them, so they will collect all the 4 electrical appliances and the computers. So washing machines that do not interest the SMEs, the WE facility would have an incentive to recycle that. So allow me to ask a question about the industry environment. If you're talking about waste electrical equipment, there might be values in different areas. The whole equipment could be resold, so these SMEs might welcome this, where they resell the whole item to a third world country, for example. The second scenario might be there are critical components that are easy to dismantle, let's say a computer hard drive. And the third scenario would be after removing toxic hazardous material, that might involve complex procedures, and you have to isolate copper, aluminum, and so on. So there might be different values in different business models involving different work procedures. So if you're referring to the small recyclers and the WE facility, there is a technical there's a difference in technical ability. So that might be lead to a division of labor. So would that help towards explaining why there's a market niche for everybody? I don't want to answer on your behalf, but I've been in the electronics industry for many years, and I feel that there are different business models, business space for large and small, medium recyclers. So in the future, when we have the WE facility and legislation that they cannot discard this recklessly, then perhaps this explanation can help you understand the operations of this industry. I'll defer to Mr. Lai. Well, Chairman, in the first scenario, let's say we have an equipment that could be resold. Well, that would not involve the facility because the facility handles dismantling. Now, the third scenario where we have to remove toxic hazardous material, that is more complex and we need more licensing. So that would be handled by the government. In the middle, it would depend on the business model. The components, as I answered Ms. Sid Ho, we might charge a service fee. The government facility might charge a service fee, and as Chairman said, the components might be dismantled. So that would be a business model, and recyclers might choose that operation. And the third scenario, we would have private recyclers. Well, that might answer Mr. Chan Galok's concerns. They will not. The government facility will not resell equipment. They will not compete with SMEs. So these small recyclers, they can resell. They are not dismantling, so they can still have. They still have room to operate. Well, if we have small recyclers after retrieving the material, if they want to export it, then they need an export license. We have to ensure that the target country, the destination country, we have to ensure that they have this recycling dismantling ability. Mr. Chan, thank you for explaining. My question wasn't about a piece of equipment and repackaging it and selling it as secondhand. I'm trying to compare apples with apples. If you repackage a secondhand equipment, that's not relevant to our legislation. It has not. But my question was not. I did not intend to cover that area, but I welcome you mentioning this, and we can bear that in mind. I just want to ask how the future industry will evolve. Would like to know what assumptions were made. The government official is very confident that we can find a new market balance, but as in our hearing with the deputations and discussions with the industry, they are worried that the large companies would squeeze out the smaller companies, and you cannot rule out these fears and concerns and feel that it will not happen. It's just that in legislating this bill, Chairman, as an industry veteran, or a veteran of the electronics industry, when we scrutinize this bill, we can think about this and think about how this industry will evolve. And I hope that we're not just talking about quantities and size, if there is a profit margin and so on. We have to bear in mind that these things might happen. But of course, I support the government's direction in building this facility from the environmental perspective. It's not. I do not. By mentioning these issues, I do not mean to obstruct this proposal. So when we continue the scrutiny, we might need to revisit the environment panel.
我聽到啊，陳議員。
Yes, Chairman, I've noted Mr. Chan's views. These views will be recorded. I want to say that this bill doesn't include any provision on this we facility. But then all recyclers, including the we facility operator, have to comply with the legislation. So in fact, we are trying to provide a level playing field. At the moment, there are people who handle toxic e-waste unlawfully. But now we are requiring that the storage and the handling of toxic e-waste will have to be licensed, and so investments will have to be made. And so we're trying to provide a level playing field. And then we will, of course, administratively try to address the industry's concerns. I want to continue, Chairman. So there are exemption arrangements. For example, the location of the premises, the area of the premises. On the 30th of April, the administration said or told us that it didn't know how many such small operators there were. I am, in fact, I'm worried that there may be subcontracting in order to circumvent a licensing requirement, because under the present proposal, small operators can be exempted. The area is less than 100 square meters, or these operators operate in multi-story industrial buildings. The administration may think that these operators should not be carrying out dismantling work. That's why, and so I am worried that we may have a situation like that. We see for unlicensed guest houses. So we are worried that some recyclers may use various ways and means to circumvent the compliance requirements. But then you've told us that you do not know how many such small recyclers there are. But I want to say that on this one, I am concerned or even worried. So I just want you to assure us that you will be keeping a close eye on this area. All right, I think we've raised all our concerns. The purpose of this bill is to make sure that these regulated electrical equipment can be recycled, reused. And at the moment, there are operations which make use of loopholes in the law, and such operations can no longer exist. But then for those who carry out the recycling business in a lawful manner, there will be adjustments to the overall landscape. I understand that the recycling industry in general welcomes the proposals. But then or maybe some problems that we haven't expected may arise. And so the administration should watch out for such developments. Right, so I think we can now move on to the Assistant Legal Advisor's correspondence with the administration. I want to now refer members to refer now refer members to paper 725 bracket 01 and 788 bracket 04, and we've got the administration's reply, CB 180702, and also paper 919 bracket 02, and members can discuss these papers. Does the legal advisor want to say anything? Please use the mic. Thank you. I would like to invite members to refer to the blue bill, and it's page C621. 621. Right, please mark that page, and then please also refer to page C631. Page C631 is the basis for charging the recycling fee. Correct me if I'm wrong. If there are situations falling under Section 37, then recycling fees are payable. And then may I refer members to paper CB 1919 bracket 02. Paragraph 3. There is some background information for members' discussion. And we've also got paper 712 bracket 03. And that is registered suppliers will have to pay the recycling fee and we're talking about REE used in Hong Kong or distributed to the Hong Kong market, but not REE exported out of Hong Kong, which will ultimately be used outside Hong Kong. This is the policy objective, and we've looked at the policy objective, and we've compared that with what is said in Section 37, page C631. If I am a registered supplier in Hong Kong and there is an REE manufactured in Hong Kong, then that would mean the situation may fall under 37(1)(a). The equipment is manufactured in Hong Kong by the supplier in the course of the supplier's business. So it's, just look at this example, members. And the supplier distributes the REE to consumers. And according to the policy objective, if the REE is for export out of Hong Kong, then a recycling fee is not payable. Members, you can also refer back to C621. And you see definitions for distribute, use, supplier, and consumer. And we can't see any definitions based on the territory. merely says in Section 37 that the equipment is manufactured in Hong Kong by the supplier and the cost of the supplier's business. So if I am a registered Hong Kong supplier and then I sell an REE to a consumer overseas, and so that's an REE exported out of Hong Kong, I am a local supplier. Do I need to pay the recycling fee? If the answer is no, then where or which part of the legislation can I rely on to justify not paying the not being required to pay the recycling fee? Mr. Lai. For REE used or distributed in Hong Kong, recycling fees are payable. And at the beginning of the meeting, we explained the situation under different scenarios. We look at whether the REE is used or distributed in Hong Kong. The legal advisor asked what will happen if the REE is distributed to a place outside Hong Kong. I want to say that these provisions only have legal effect in Hong Kong. So for REE distributed or used in Hong Kong, then recycling fees are payable. And Mr. Lai, what if an importer brings in certain REE for re-export via Hong Kong? Then will he have to pay the recycling fees? May I refer to Section 37B2, Chairman? If the supplier distributes the equipment for further distribution in Hong Kong, then recycling fees are payable. But then if the supplier exports the REE, then the recycling fees need not be paid. So for REE to be exported, there is no need to pay recycling fees. Yes, I understand, Chairman. I think I do understand the policy objective. For exports, no recycling fees have to be paid. But then, if I look at Section 37 only, and Section 37 is a section about charging the recycling fees. And as a supplier, if I fall under 37(1)(a), I manufacture the REE and then I distribute the REE to a consumer, and it doesn't mention whether the consumer is in Hong Kong or is not in Hong Kong, and the distribution, this act of distribution occurs in Hong Kong, then as a registered supplier in Hong Kong, it will be my duty to pay the recycling fees. So, if it is the legislative intent that if the REE is exported and for use outside Hong Kong, then there is no need to pay the recycling fees. And I think if that's the legislative intent, then that should be spelled out very clearly so that people will not be in doubt. Yes, of course, I understand that Hong Kong legislation only has legal effect in Hong Kong. But I hope that the administration will understand that it's the supplier, not the consumer, who has to pay the recycling fees. And if the supplier is registered in Hong Kong, then he is subject to the laws of Hong Kong. And the act of distribution occurs within the territory of Hong Kong, then he may be in doubt as to whether he needs to pay the recycling fees.
So let's try to clarify that today. And you could also consider whether the wording can be clarified after the meeting to avoid confusion. For example, if there's a re-export, do we need to pay the recycling fee? So, Chairman, in our response to the Assistant Legal Advisor in paragraph 4, we have mentioned that our understanding is that unless there is a legislation, otherwise Hong Kong legislation will not have extrajudicial effect. So even though we didn't mention a Hong Kong consumer, but our understanding of this type of law, if we do not specify it, then it refers to Hong Kong consumers. So perhaps our legal advisor could supplement. Mr. Mo? Chairman, the criteria for paying the recycling fee, the supplier has to distribute the product to the consumer, as mentioned just now. The legislation only covers distribution in Hong Kong. If the distribution occurs in Hong Kong, then the legislation can take effect. But manufacturing, export, that would not be for a consumer. The distribution would not be for a consumer. I'm guessing that the EPD could also provide some information if there would be a non-consumer, an intermediary that would allow the product to be delivered overseas. So distribution to Hong Kong consumer, the distribution to a Hong Kong consumer is not occurring in Hong Kong. If we say distribution of electrical product to a consumer, and if we wanted to take it effect in Hong Kong, even though it is exported, since it does not have extrajudicial effect, it will not cannot apply. So a consumer refers to, let's say, a tourist in Hong Kong, and if they take it back overseas, so they would have to pay the recycling fee then. Chairman, we had discussed this problem, so the department can clarify the policy. And if you're saying where the product is ultimately used, then we'll have to tread very carefully. If you want to consider this as well, the implementation, whether it can be enforced if I purchase it in Hong Kong and there are exemptions overseas, if I emigrate, and so on, there are many scenarios that would lead to technical difficulties in enforcement. Well, suppliers would distribute to electrical products to consumers overseas. That might occur because we do have internet sales. The suppliers in Hong Kong, but he can sell to overseas consumers through the internet. So that would be covered by the legislation in your intention. Should they pay the recycling fee or not? Well, Chairman, the whole principle is that they have to distribute in Hong Kong, or it has to be purchased in Hong Kong. So let's say a tourist comes to Hong Kong, they purchase a regulated product, they have to pay the recycling fee. Whether they use it in Hong Kong or take it back to their home country, they have to pay. But just now Mr. Lai said that with internet sales, overseas consumers, they purchase from a Hong Kong supplier, and this product is mailed directly to this overseas consumer, then they do not have to pay the recycling fee. The test would be whether this product was distributed or whether the transaction occurred in Hong Kong. Legal advisor? I just want to follow up on one point. I'd like you to refer to page C620. There is a definition for distribution. One definition of distribution is in C620D, to give the equipment to another person as a prize or gift for business purposes. So, if a supplier in Hong Kong has manufactured a regulated product in the schedule, and then he mails the product as a gift for business purposes. Let's say they send it to the US. So I'd like to ask, under these circumstances, will that fall under clause 37, where the supplier has manufactured a product and for business purposes they have distributed the product? So will they have to pay, the supplier, will they have to pay the recycling fee? Regarding, I understand. When we have electronic transactions, the contract might not be in Hong Kong, that I understand. But regarding the definition of 31D, will that scenario arise? I'd like the government to explain. Chairman, we need to consider, in footnote 1, we mentioned we had a study regarding internet, e-commerce, how it occurs in the industry. The information is for promotion, so the legal advisor referred to distribution. Aside from sales, it includes a gift and so on. So internet sales, that's not the way the industry operates. So just now we talked about some abstract concepts, some hypothetical situations, not the actual situation. And there's a definition for distribution in the Blue Bill C620. We see that the scenario imagined by the legal advisor, if the product was sent overseas as a gift, that is not the target of our levy, so we would not need to charge the recycling fee. I just want to repeat that could the government consider, if that is your legislative intention, could you reflect it in the wording so that we can understand? And as a registered supplier, I can know for sure what the policy intention was. It was just targeting distribution in Hong Kong. And if I donate it or give it as a gift, I will not have to pay the recycling fee. So would you consider that? Well, just looking at the wording, it refers to a consumer giving a gift, give the equipment to another person. It sounds very clearly this is occurring in Hong Kong. We understand your legislative intent. So, let's say a consumer, even if a tourist, if they use the product overseas, it would be regulated by this legislation. The supplier has to pay the recycling. We had discussed this before, we understand. I think the legal advisor's view is that, well, given the case, then clauses 31 and 37, could they be further clarified? So we do have time to look into this. You can also follow up after the meeting, whether you can refine the wording. There's just the two of us left. Chairman, I think the question we need to consider is not reiterating the legislative intention. I think we understand that. It's just that how do we comply and we're not charged the levy mistakenly, or perhaps we don't want to relax the requirement. We have experience in purchasing, assembling computers from a Golden Shopping Center, and in fact, I have overseas friends who do that. And now that even though it's for personal use, tourists, the supplier would still have to charge the recycling fee, even if they just transit Hong Kong and have a computer assembled. So if you clarify that, that would be better. Otherwise, we shouldn't be creating any gray areas. So the DOJ colleagues, could you make it more accurate and clarified such that there's no misunderstanding? Thank you. Okay, we've discussed that. The legal advisor has another question. It's because of a one-stop service. Since we're talking about levying the fee, if the consumer ultimately wants to have the product removed, under what circumstances can they have the product removed? So please refer to the Blue Bill C642. Clause 42. I just want to clarify the legislative intent before I can give you a detailed response. So according to the Blue Bill, if the scenario I described occurs, can the consumer ask the retailer to remove the product free? Let's say, for example, in a franchise store, let's say I purchased a product in the schedule. I'm aware there's a label, it's a recycling label, it's a regulated electrical equipment. I've used it a few years, and now I want to discard the product. So, but I do not intend to purchase a new replacement. I just want to discard it. So under these circumstances, can I contact the retailer and ask them to arrange to have people remove the electrical appliance that I've used a few years? My understanding, there's no need to have a new purchase. As long as the regulated product has a label, they can request for this removal service. Mr. Lai? Clause 42B refers to the consumer has to request this service. Our regulations have not been completed, but we discussed with the industry that the removal service should have a deadline for application. Otherwise, a few years down the road, the shop might have closed, the documents might have disappeared, so there are difficulties in implementation. But the removal service is a statutory service. There are different channels for removal, including the vide facility, for the 4 electrical products and computers that were purchased before the law takes effect. We can have arrangements for the disposal, and the regulation. We'll also have thorough discussions with the industry in drafting the regulations. Legal advisor. My question wasn't focused on the deadline, but I thank the government for referring to a deadline. Why do I want to clarify? The background is because I'd like members to look at 42(2)ABC, because I can see that if the retailer distributes a regulated electronic equipment to a consumer, and then the consumer, according to the removal conditions and other relevant conditions, requests the retailer to remove a separate electrical or electronic product.
And the former and the latter fall within the descriptions of the same item of electrical equipment or electronic equipment set out in column 2 of Schedule 6. Then when we come to 2B, we are talking about removing another item of EEEE. So it seems that there is an REEA, and then next time I buy REEB, and only then will REEA be removed. Or is it that I do not need to buy REEB from the seller? I can always go back to the seller for the removal of REEA without having to buy REEB, because 2A is about the former, and then 2B is about the removing another item, and that is the latter. And the latter may be the same REE, but I just want to see clarification. I don't quite understand what the question is. Perhaps I can explain our concept. So if you buy at a seller the REE, then you can, I'll say if you buy a TV from a seller, then you can require the seller to remove a TV but not a computer. But then it says here that there are two REE. Now TVA is the old TV, TVB or item B is the new TV. So is it that I have to buy TVA first and then, according to the removal terms, I will I have to ask the seller to remove TVB, item B. And it said that B and A can be the same equipment, and that would mean the same category as stipulated in the schedule. So according to the administration, there is no need for you to buy a new TV set in order to ask the seller to dispose of the old TV set for you. So if you can contact the original seller, and the seller will send someone to remove the old TV for you and to send the old TV for recycling. So is it that you have to buy a new TV in order to get the service? I want to say that concerning the disposal of REE, removal service is only one of the channels for recycling. Other alternatives include private recyclers and community green stations. But then under the law, the seller has to provide the removal service. The seller has to be clear as to under what circumstances he has to provide the removal service. And similarly, consumers need to be told very clearly under what circumstances they can make use of the removal service. Now, for the removal service, one distinct advantage is that the seller will go to the consumer's home to collect the REE. But then if you use the community green station, you will have to take the REE to the station yourself. I think as we're talking about a responsibility in the legislation, everything has to be spelled out very clearly. That's called the take-back service, and the design is based on having a new item as well as an old item. But of course, we also have the community green station. But then for the removal service stipulated in the bill, it's we're talking about an old equipment versus a new equipment versus an old one. If a consumer, say, requests a service, then some records will have to be made and kept. So it's better to have a time limit. Say if I buy a TV set, I use it for 3 years, I don't want it anymore, then the seller may have difficulties in compliance after 3 years. So we are here talking about the new versus the old. But then if you do not buy a new equipment, then in fact there are other alternatives. So the administration has clarified that there must be an old equipment and a new equipment. So that's clear. But then because the administration seemed to have suggested that in fact even if a consumer doesn't buy a new piece of equipment, he can still contact the seller for the removal of the old equipment. Alright, so that's clear. The legislative intent is that if a consumer buys a new item, then he can have the old item removed. But then if you do not buy a new item and you want the old item to be removed, then you have to make use of other ways, and ultimately the old item will or can go to the WE facility. All right, so I think we've sorted out the outstanding issues, and as we still have some time left, I think we can start clause by clause scrutiny. All right, let's continue with our work. Mr. Lai or Mr. Chan? Clause by clause scrutiny, yes. Alright, I believe members have got the marked up copy. CB1712-01 is the marked up copy prepared by the Secretariat. So please look at the blue bill. We have Part 1, short title and commencement. The commencement date will be gazetted. Then Part 2, amendments to the Product Eco-Responsibility Ordinance. So let's refer to the marked up copy. First of all, an amendment to Section 3. We're going to insert the definition of regulated electrical equipment. So here we're talking about the 4 types of electrical appliances as well as computers. This is a response to the question about what is going to happen to second-hand equipment. Yes, please continue. Next, an amendment to Part 2, Division 1 of the Product Eco-Responsibility Ordinance. So there are enforcement powers, and then there are enforcement or regulatory provisions for different types of products. In fact, we adopted the same approach when we introduced the plastic shopping bag levy. So here we add behind plastic shopping bags and regulated electrical equipment. Section 5 is a technical amendment. 5.1, we have regulations for different product eco-responsibility schemes, and for plastic bags, the regulations are under Section 29, and then for REE, Section 44. Then 5.2f, again a technical amendment. For the plastic bag levy, we amended some appeal arrangements. And we've also got this technical amendment for REE. So certain decisions made by the executive can be dealt with by the appeal mechanism. And then 7(2), power to obtain information. In fact, 7.2 applies to different types of regulated products. But when 7.2 was drafted, it was mainly for plastic shopping bags. And we needed to obtain a lot of information. But now we have more general wording proposed for REEs. Yes, I think we can continue. Section 13, appeals. We have these appellable matters which can be dealt with under the appeal mechanism in the ordinance, and in fact there's no change in the policy. Now, because so we have the English as well as the Chinese version. So perhaps after we've studied the Chinese version, we should immediately look at the English version, as our memory is still fresh. Right, let's look at the English version.
呢個部分呢，
Chairman, there's nothing that we need to mention in the English part that you need to take note. It's a bilingual drafting. The content, there's nothing special. There's nothing special in the bilingual laws. Let's continue. We move on to part 4. Part 4, we have an addition that deals with regulated electrical equipment, clause 31 all the way to clause 45. And we have some schedules. We have some interpretation, some terms that need to be defined, and the legal advisor had already mentioned some of them. For example, distribute, residential unit, and residential property. There's not much else that I need to mention for you to take note. Well, as in our previous session, we had discussed a lot about clause 31 and 37 regarding the legislative intention. Distribution is conducted in Hong Kong, so perhaps after the meeting you can see whether the wording can be tightened up. Okay. Division 2 of Part 4 refers to the registration of suppliers. The suppliers have to register in order to distribute the regulated electrical equipment. Otherwise, they commit an offense and they can be liable to a fine at level 6. So the effect of clause 32 is that whenever you engage in distribution business, the suppliers need to register. Clause 33 deals with the registration criteria the person needs to apply, and then the director can approve the registration. Clause 34 deals with cancellation of registration. If a registered supplier is not engaged in the business, then their registration can be cancelled. Regarding registration, we're talking about the registration of suppliers, and in the definition, in the interpretation, we have suppliers and retailers. So does that mean retailers do not need to register under the ordinance? Chairman, your understanding is correct. Well, there is a vote going on, and since there's just could you allow me to could we break for 5 minutes to allow me? But before I leave, we do have the idea of rent in the interpretation, so could you clarify that for me when I return? Let's break for 5 minutes.